1.3 Metric Unit Conversions. Let's work on the example 13. We need to convert 0.15 milliamps to microamps. So first, let's write down 0.15 milliamps, and we're going to rewrite it to 0.15 times 10 to the minus 3 amps. The goal is to convert from milliamps to microamps. A microamps equals to 10 to the minus 6. In order to get 10 to the minus 6 from 10 to the minus 3, you can multiply another 10 to the minus 3. So 10 to the minus 3 times 10 to the minus 3 equals to 10 to the negative 6, which is the micro. However, you cannot just multiply this number to the original value. You need to multiply, but also need to divide it, which means you multiply a 1. So let's rearrange it. That 0.15 times 10 to the minus 3a, you multiply a 10 to the minus 3, and then divided by 10 to the minus 3. In algebra, we know if we multiply 1 over 10 to the minus 3 means divided by 10 to the minus 3. And then the blue underline includes that 10 to the minus 3 times 10 to the minus 3, so we can combine here, turning into 10 to the negative 6, and that's the micro. And then that leaves 0.15 times 10 to the negative 6 amps, multiply 1 over 10 to the negative 3. Replace the 10 to the minus 6 by micro. And then let's combine the numbers. The 0.15 times the last number 10 to the third is 150. And then append microamps. This is the answer. The answer equals to 150 microampere. Example 14. Convert 4,500 microvolts to millivolts. So first we write down the 4,500 microvolts and then convert the micro to 10 to the negative 6. So that's 4,500 times 10 to the negative 6 volts. Since we need to convert from micro to milli, we're going to break that 10 to the minus 6 to millis. We know a milli is 10 to the minus 3. So 10 to the minus 3 times 10 to the minus 3 together is that 10 to the negative 6. So we rewrite it, that equals to 4,500 times 10 to the minus 3 times 10 to the negative 3 volts. And then we're going to combine, but this time we're going to combine the 4,500 and the first 10 to the minus 3. And then the second 10 to the minus 3, let's put that in prefix. We're going to replace that 10 to the minus 3 by prefix, that's milli. Therefore, we rewrite it. The 4,500 times 10 to the minus 3 becomes 4.5. And then the 10 to the minus 3 volts becomes millivolts. So the answer is 4.5 millivolts. Example 15. Convert 5,000 nanoamps to microamps. So first we write down 5,000 nanoamps, and we put this in the power of 10 format. That equals to 5,000 times 10 to the negative 9 amps. Our goal is to convert from nanoamps to microamps. And we know the microamps is 10 to the negative 6. So we're going to break that 10 to the minus 9 in terms of 10 to the minus 6. We know 10 to the minus 6 times 10 to the minus 3 equals to 10 to the minus 9. So let's rewrite the expression. 5,000 times 10 to the negative 6 times 10 to the negative 3 ampere. And now we're going to recombine this. We can replace the 10 to the minus 6 by the prefix micro. So it's 5,000 micro times 10 to the minus 3 amps. The 5,000 and the 10 to the negative 3 can be combined. After combination, it's 5. And we keep 2 decimal digits. The answer is 5.00 microamps. Example 16. Convert 47,000 picofarads to microfarads. First, we write down the number in engineering notation. So the 40,000 picofarad is 47,000 times 10 to the negative 12 farad. Because we want to convert from pico to micro, and the micro is 10 to the negative 6, we are going to break that 10 to the minus 12 to 10 to the minus 6. 10 to the negative 6 times 10 to the negative 6 equals to 10 to the negative 12. Therefore, the expression can be written as 47,000 times 10 to the minus 6 times 10 to the negative 6 farad. The last 10 to the minus 6 converted to prefix micro. And then the 47,000 and the first 10 to the minus 6 combined. This equals to 0.047 microfarad. Example 17. Convert 0.00022 microfarad to picofarads. First, let's rewrite the expression. And then instead of using the prefix, we're going to use engineering notation. That 0.00022 microfarad becomes 0.00022 times 10 to the negative 6. Our goal is to get the picofarad from microfarad. A picofarad is 10 to the negative 12. So here, we can multiply a 1, but this 1 is 10 to the negative 6 times 10 to the positive 6. Right, their product equals to 1. The reason we pick 10 to the negative 6 times 10 to the positive 6, that 1, because if we combine the middle 10 to the minus 6 and the second 10 to the minus 6, that equals to a pico, which is 10 to the minus 12. How about let's replace that by the pico symbol. The following expression will have 0.00022 pico times 10 to the 6 farad. Let's multiply the 0.0022 by 10 to the 6. That's 220. And then append the pico and the farad. The answer is 220 picofarad. Example 18. Convert 1800 kiloohms to megaohms. First, let's write that in engineering notation. So the 1800 kiloohms becomes 1800 times 10 to the third ohms. Our goal is to get megaohms. So we can multiply a 1, but this 1 is made of 10 to the third divided by 10 to the third. And then we're gonna rearrange it. The next expression becomes 1800 times 10 to the third times 10 cube, and then times 1 over 10 cube ohms. The two 10 cubes in the center becomes 10 to the 6, and this is mega. So we replace the 10 to the 6 by mega, and then we combine the remaining numbers. The 1800 divided by 1000 equals to 1.8, followed by mega ohms. The answer is 1.80 megaohms. Example 19. Add 15 milliamps and 8,000 microamps and express the answer in milliamps. To solve this problem, we need to align the prefixes. So we have 18 milliamps and added to 8,000 microamps. We can either turn all the prefix to milliamps or all the prefixes to microamps. So you take that call. In this example, I will use milliamps. First, I rewrite that 15 milliamps and use engineering notation. That becomes 15 times 10 to the minus 3 amps. Then the 8,000 microamps becomes 8,000 times 10 to the minus 6 amps. We're gonna convert that micro to a milli. Because a micro, the 10 to the minus 6 converted to milli can be broken into two parts. That's 10 to the minus 3 times 10 to the minus 3. Together is that 10 to the minus 6. So the next expression is 15 times 10 to the minus 3 amps plus 8,000, and then multiply 10 to the minus 3 times another 10 to the minus 3 amps. So in next expression, we have 15 milliamps plus the last term, that 10 to the minus 3 amps becomes milliamps. So that leaves 8,000 times 10 to the negative 3, followed by milliamps. Now we're going to combine the numbers in the second term. We have 15 milliamps plus the 8,000 multiplied 10 to the minus 3 becomes 8. So the second term is 8 milliamps. Now we have 15 milliamps added to 8 milliamps. The answer is 23 milliamps.